This is the reading lecture 637 through 645, starting with the Spanish-American War. All right. Cubans rebelled against the Spanish, because Cuba is a colony of the Spanish, several times in the 1800s. And in 1895, Jose Marti begins another revolt. He's motivated because he wants to get rid of the Spanish. We are motivated because we have American possessions there. We have property and investments. And then, of course, to throw it in there to make it more humane, of course, they're just treating the Cubans so bad. And the Cleveland administration advised Spain to adopt reforms. And they really don't. They do a little bit, but not a whole lot. So setting up the scene here, what's going on. This is a time when there are two competing newspapers. We have the New York Journal, owned by William Randolph Hearst, and the New York World, owned by Joseph Pulitzer. Okay? Again, New York Journal, William Randolph Hearst, Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. Okay? And in order to sell more newspapers, they start fudging the lines a little bit. They start blurring the lines a little bit. They start making up stuff. That's called yellow journalism or yellow press. And the definition's there. But the whole idea is to sell newspapers. And if you can sell newspapers, you're going to make money, but also you are influencing a lot of people. So through this, it leads to the United States or the people calling for intervention by America on behalf of the Cubans in Cuba against Spain. And that's kind of what's going on. The president at the time is McKinley. Cleveland has passed on the torch to McKinley. McKinley wins the presidential election of 1898. And he's going to have to deal with this situation. So, first and foremost, they have a general there named General Weyler. Weyler. And we tell the Spanish, you got to get rid of this guy. He's, rounding people up into concentration camps. He's just all around not a good guy. And they remove Weyler. General Valeriano Weyler. Couldn't remember his first name earlier. And we see some progress. However, we intercept a telegraph or a letter known as the Delome letter, and it was written by a Spanish diplomat. And in it, it called President McKinley weak. Well, I'll just tell you, no matter who the president is, he's our president, or she eventually. And if a country calls a president weak, Americans come to their defense. And the people are up in arms. Not to mention, we have sent a warship, the USS Maine, to the Philippines, to Cuba. And these two newspapers, the New York World and the New York Journal, have sent reporters down there. And they've reported back, specifically a reporter for the New York World, and we have the telegraph, that tells Joseph Pulitzer, there's not anything going down here. Please tell me what I need to do. There's just nothing going on. And Pulitzer says, report the news, I'll make a war. So, unbeknownst to everybody else, the USS Maine explodes in Havana Harbor. We don't know what happened at the time. Well, of course, what do these two new newspapers choose to write about? The destruction of the New York Journal. There you go. Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of the enemy. Assistant Secretary Roosevelt, that's Teddy Roosevelt, is convinced the explosion of the warship was not an accident. $50,000 reward for the detection of the perpetrator. Okay. Naval officers think the Maine was destroyed by a Spanish mine. Joseph Pulitzer. Maine explosion caused by a bomb or torpedo. Captain Sigmy and Consul General Lee in doubt. The world has sent a special tug with submarine divers to Havana to find out. So he's literally the new Joseph Pulitzer is. That's a lie. Okay. But 260 men did die. All right. So it's a tragedy. What we know now is that the USS Maine was a first-generation warship, and it was defective. The boiler was underneath where we kept all of the artillery. And so when the boiler, which happens sometimes, exploded, it set off the armory, and the whole ship blew up. But we didn't know that at the time. So as I was saying, we don't know what was actually going on at the time, but because of Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal, people are whipped into even bigger of a frenzy. They've criticized our president. They've supposedly, as they've been told, blew up the USS Maine. So we declare war on Spain. And we do that with the Teller Amendment added to it, saying that we will not annex Cuba. We're fighting for their independence, more or less. Okay, so the decisive battles of the Spanish-American War occur in the Philippines and in Cuba. Well, in the Philippines, Admiral Dewey captures Manila Bay, and we are able to annex the Philippines. I don't know why it says Hawaii there. We also kicked the crap out of the Spanish in Cuba. And it's just funny because Teddy Roosevelt was the assistant secretary to the Navy, and he resigned his position and decides he wants to go have fun in this splendid, what he calls this splendid little war, and goes and has his own men meet down in Miami and sail to Havana and fight. And they're known as the Rough Riders. Okay. Here they are, pictured here. There's Roosevelt. They are supposedly the winners or the big factor why we win the Battle of San Juan Hill. But actually it wasn't. They were at the top of San Juan Hill, and the all-Negro unit was fighting the Spanish, and they're holding their own. Yet when Roosevelt's group toots the horn and rides down the hill on their horses, the Spanish surrender. Well, yellow journalism, yellow press makes Teddy Roosevelt seem like he was the massive winner of this battle. He really wasn't. But he's not going to complain because he'll ride that fame all the way to becoming president, as we know a little bit later. Okay. But after we take out Cuba, we also get Puerto Rico. Okay. So Spain signed an armistice with us 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days after the battle happened. After the war started, we lost 345 in combat, but we lost 2,500 to disease in Cuba, yellow fever, malaria, things of that nature. The armistice required Spain to accept Cuban independence. They had to give us Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The United States also got Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, where we could set up a military base. The Filipinos had been fighting the French for years. And with us taking over the Filipinos fought with us to beat the French. And they thought they were fighting for their independence. And it sparked a strong debate over imperialism. There is even a group that comes about in America called the Anti-Imperialistic League that was formed to fight the treaty that was eventually ratified by the Senate. And that's going to lead us into fighting the Filipinos and their leader, Emilio Aguinaldo, and killing a whole bunch of Filipinos in order to take the Philippines. This is a really cool cartoon here where it's McKinley on the right and Uncle Sam on the left, and McKinley's basically serving up Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and then the Sandwich Islands there, Hawaii, as the appetizer. Here, as I was mentioning earlier, the Filipinos feel betrayed by the Treaty of Paris and American ownership, and we fight them, and we bombard the Philippines. It's not a whole lot of combat where we die, so we kill about 400,000 Filipinos, whether it be men, women, children, elderly, it doesn't really matter. And it's looked at as in history as that racism fueled this brutality. It's reported in the press, revived by the Anti-Imperialistic League, but eventually the Filipinos come under our control. In the Philippines, we control the Philippines all the way until after we give it back to them in 1945 after World War II. Now, we feel a little bit left out because other European nations had carved out spheres of influence in China, where they were the dominant country. And the American business community is alarmed by this. So we want to get in there. So Secretary of State John Hay in 1899 asked the imperial powers to maintain a commercial and financial open door for all nations. It's known as the open door policy or the open door notes. Well, a group of individuals known as the Society of Harmonious and Righteous Fists doesn't like all these countries being in there, and they rebel. And it's known as the Boxer Rebellion. But because we and all these other nations who've carved out spheres of influence in China want to keep continuing their work in China, they send a multinational force, including America, to put this down. And it's put down with relative ease. And the open door policy or open door notes becomes a doctrine of U.S. foreign policy, and it's used to dominate foreign markets. Let us just have a little area in your country, and we will trade our goods. And it just helps us dominate them and their economy. And that is the lecture for quiz pages 637 through 645.